So in Mark chapter 3, there is it's kind of short but incredibly important piece of passage for us. This is what it says. It says, Jesus went up on a mountainside, and he called to him those he wanted, and they came to him. He appointed the 12 that they might be with him, and that he might send them out to preach and to have authority to drive out demons. It's incredible to me, the same place that Jesus goes to pray oftentimes, the mountainside, is the same place that he goes to appoint his 12 disciples, right? And not only does he call them, he calls them up to the mountainside, but they come. And when they come, he makes them into who they will be. This is so incredibly important to us. And one of the great things that we believe about Jesus, one of the great things that we know about Jesus is that he calls us into action with him. Right? So we believe that we're called as individuals, as an individual Christian, I'm called to something. We also believe that we're called as a church. As a church, we are called to something. But what is that? Like, it's fun to say it, like we're called to be a part of the mission, but what is that mission that we're called to? Well, I think part of it Paul addresses in his letter to the Ephesians. And really one of the things he's addressing in his letter to the Ephesians is this turmoil that is kind of risen up between the Jewish Christians and the Gentile Christians. And the Jewish Christians wanted the Gentiles to assimilate fully into Jewish custom and Jewish tradition, and the Gentiles didn't want to have anything to do with that. And so it created this division right there in the middle of the church. There in Ephesus, there is this dividing wall of hostility that rises up between these two groups. In fact, this is what Paul says as he addresses this in his letter to the Ephesians. He says, "For he himself is our peace." He's speaking about Jesus here. "He himself is our peace, who has made the two groups one and has destroyed the barrier, the dividing wall of hostility, by setting aside in his flesh the law with its commands and regulations. His purpose was to create in himself one new humanity out of two, thus making peace, and in one body to reconcile both of them to God through the cross, by which he put to death their hostility." I mean, this is why Paul writes in other places, in other letters, there is no Greek, there is no Jew, there is no Gentile, there is no male, there is no female, there's no slave, there's no free. We are all one in Jesus Christ. He speaks specifically about this dividing wall of hostility that raises up in the midst of groups. And man, I think right now we can definitely understand that all of us segment off into these different groups, Democrat, Republican. We segment off into groups based off of race. We segment off into groups based off of gender, and even like people who want to wear masks and people who don't want to wear masks. And what's right in between all of these groups but hostility between us. This is not what Paul says that Jesus calls us to. He doesn't call us to participate in these worldly groups. His purpose wasn't to make Gentiles become more like Jews or to make Jews to become more like Gentiles, but to establish one church of people that responds to a suffering and broken world out of love and grace and not from manipulation or coercion. His purpose isn't to make Republicans become more like Democrats or Democrats to become more like Republicans, but for us to unite in mission, for us to put Christian above our politics, to put Christian above our groups. And the best part of this passage in Mark chapter 3 is this idea that he calls, they came, and he made them. Jesus wants for us as a church to unite in mission. But before even he could make the disciples into what they would become, they had to come to him. They had to be open to the call. Church, he is calling us to tear down the walls of hostility that rises up in the midst of all of these groups. To become one church, to become peace for the world. Will you come?